ago, Hebrew prophets foretold that one day the Jewish people would return from all over the world.
There are moments in history when the world feels like it's shifting, moments when something ancient begins to stir. And if you've been paying attention, you may have sensed it too. But what if I told you that nearly 2,600 years ago, in the dust and ruins of a fallen Jerusalem, a man saw our time, not symbolically, not poetically, but literally our headlines, our migrations, our conflicts, our rebirths. This man was Ezekiel, and the vision he saw, a valley of dry bones shaking back to life, was not just a comforting myth for a devastated people. According to historians, linguists, theologians, and even secular researchers who don't believe in prophecy at all, Ezekiel's vision describes something that should have been impossible. A nation scattered across every continent for more than 2 millennia. A people who survived exile, empire, persecution, and genocide. A land that went from desolate wasteland to global agricultural powerhouse. A return so improbable that no other nation in human history has ever accomplished anything remotely like it. And yet, it happened. Not in ancient times, not in medieval times, but in our time, in the last 100 years, in the age of cameras, newspapers, and live broadcasts, when every step could be recorded, debated, analyzed, and archived, just as if history itself wanted to make sure no one could deny it. But this video isn't just about Israel's rebirth. It's about something deeper. Because Ezekiel didn't just predict the return of land, language, and borders. He predicted a return of identity, a rebirth of meaning, and a future spiritual awakening that the world has not yet seen. And that part of the prophecy, the part many people overlook, is still ahead of us. So here's the real question. If the impossible parts of the prophecy have already come true, what happens when we reach the parts that haven't? Before we get there, we need to step back not just into the past few decades, but into the ancient world where this all began. Imagine Jerusalem in 597 BC, its walls broken, its people chained, its temple in flames, its identity shattered. In that moment, no one would have believed that the Jewish people would ever rise again, let alone return to that same land thousands of years later. Even today, political scientists and anthropologists consider Israel's survival not just unlikely, but mathematically absurd. Yet Ezekiel mentioned a detail that is easily missed. He said the bones weren't only scattered, they were very dry, meaning they weren't just dead, they had been dead for a very long time. He was describing a nation that wouldn't simply fall and return a generation later. He was describing a return after centuries of being gone, a return after the world forgot them, a return after history had erased them. And today, that return is complete, but the story is not. Because Ezekiel also saw something else coming, a second restoration. One not of soil, borders, or military strength, but of the heart. A moment when the people who returned physically would awaken spiritually. A moment that researchers, pastors, rabbis, and prophecy scholars believe may be unfolding right now. So if you've ever wondered whether ancient prophecy still matters, if you've ever questioned whether the Bible speaks to our world today, or if you simply want to understand why historians and theologians are suddenly re-examining the words written on scrolls thousands of years ago, to understand why Ezekiel's vision is so shocking, we need to step back into the world he lived in, a world crushed under Babylon's iron boots. Jerusalem wasn't just a city, it was the heart of Jewish identity, faith, culture, and future. When it fell, it wasn't only buildings that collapsed, a worldview collapsed, a promise collapsed. After Babylon, exile became a repeating pattern. The Roman destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD wasn't just a military defeat, it was the moment the Jewish identity could have vanished forever. With their sacred center gone, most cultures would have dissolved into the nations around them. But somehow, the Jewish people didn't. We know this from countless historical accounts. They rebuilt communities in North Africa. They preserved traditions in Yemen and Iraq. They carried their prayers through Europe, Asia, and beyond. They maintained their rituals even when kings, sultans, and emperors outlawed them. And yet the most extraordinary part isn't that they survived, it's that they survived as the same people, waiting for the same promises, repeating the same ancient words, next year in Jerusalem. No other displaced group carried a 2,000-year-old roadmap of return. No other people kept the same rituals intact across dozens of cultures and centuries of persecution. Historians admit this level of identity endurance is unprecedented. When you look at photographs from the concentration camps, faces without flesh, bodies reduced to bones, it's impossible not to think of Ezekiel's valley. If there was ever a moment when prophecy seemed dead, it was then. Real stories from survivors capture this devastation. One Polish Jewish woman recalled hiding a torn page from the Hebrew Bible in her clothing. She couldn't read it, it was too dangerous. But she kept it for one reason. It reminded her she belonged somewhere. She didn't know that within a few years, that somewhere would exist again. The Holocaust was the moment the bones looked driest, the moment any rational prediction of a national return seemed absurd. And yet, it was precisely after this darkest valley that history made its most dramatic turn. When David Ben-Gurion read the Declaration of Independence in Tel Aviv on May 14, 1948, reporters said the room fell into a silence that didn't feel political. It felt spiritual. Survivors in displaced persons camps wept. Jews in Yemen and Morocco lit candles. Communities in Russia whispered prayers they had been banned from speaking for generations. For many, it wasn't just a political announcement. It was Ezekiel 37 stepping out of the page and entering the modern world. And the evidence didn't stop there. Over the next decades, something extraordinary happened, something that took the prophecy of Isaiah 43 from metaphor to headline. They returned from the east, west, north, and south, just as written. Real-life examples prove this return wasn't symbolic. 1 million Russian Jews arrived after the Soviet Union fell. Ethiopian Jews were rescued in daring airlift missions, some weeping because they believed prophecy had carried them on eagle's wings. Yemeni Jews, isolated for centuries, boarded planes for the first time, thinking the aircraft were angels. Families from Argentina, France, India, and the US uprooted their lives not because they were forced, but because something in their identity drew them back. In modern interviews, many returning families say the same sentence. It felt like something was calling us home. Not politics, not economics, something deeper. Then something even stranger happened. The land changed. The barren hills Mark Twain wrote about in 1867 are now covered with vineyards, forests, and advanced irrigation systems. Israel exports fruit to dozens of countries. The desert blooms in colors ancient travelers could never imagine. It's as if the land recognized its people and responded. If the story ended in 1948, it would already be one of the most extraordinary chapters in human history. A nation destroyed, scattered, hunted, and nearly erased, suddenly rising again in the exact land they were forced to abandon. That alone would be enough to make even skeptics raise an eyebrow. But here's where the story becomes impossible to ignore. Ezekiel didn't stop with the physical restoration. He described two phases, one we've witnessed and one that may be unfolding right now. Phase 1, physical restoration, fulfilled. This includes the return of the people, the renewal of the land, the reestablishment of the nation of Israel, the gathering from all corners of the earth. And all of this happened on camera in the 20th century. But Ezekiel then describes something even more radical, something no political process can manufacture and no military can secure. Phase 2, spiritual restoration. Still unfolding, Ezekiel 36:26 describes a moment when God himself says, "I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you." This isn't about borders, armies, or diplomatic agreements. This is about identity, awakening, recognition. It points to a moment when the Jewish people will reconnect not just with their homeland, but with the one who called them back. This coming transformation echoes through other prophetic books. 2, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, and especially Zechariah, who wrote, "They will look upon me, the one they have pierced." Zechariah 12:10. Scholars differ on the interpretation, but they agree on one thing. It speaks of a future moment of national spiritual realization, something that has not yet happened. It's a question not just for theologians, but for anyone who cares about history, geopolitics, or the direction of the world. Because if Israel's physical restoration was the bones gathering, then Israel's spiritual restoration would be the breath entering, a worldwide turning point with global consequences. And many believe we're living on the edge of that shift. Over the past 20 years, something unusual has been happening within Israel. Small groups are rediscovering ancient Hebrew prayers. Archaeological discoveries are reconnecting people with their roots. Young Israelis are seeking spiritual meaning at the highest rate in modern history. Secular researchers are fascinated by Israel's prophetic fingerprints. These movements aren't headline-grabbing revolutions. They're quiet, personal, internal, but they echo the language of Ezekiel. A heart of stone becoming a heart of flesh. And that brings us to the part where ancient prophecy collides with modern reality, whether someone is religious or not. Israel remains the center of Middle Eastern conflicts, global politics, and international diplomacy. Age religious expectation. When things happen in Israel, they ripple across Europe, the US and beyond. Oil prices change, alliances shift, tensions rise, markets react, and every time Israel is in the news, there's a sense, spoken or unspoken, that something larger is at play. The prophets wrote that Israel would become a cup of trembling and a burdensome stone for all nations. Zechariah 12. Look at today's headlines. That's exactly what's happening. And here's the twist. Ezekiel's final prophecies aren't about destruction. They're about renewal. A spiritual awakening so profound that it reshapes how the world sees faith, history, and destiny for generations. People wondered whether Ezekiel's vision was a metaphor, a symbol, a poetic dream meant only to comfort a broken nation. But now we know better. We've seen the bones rise. We've watched a people return home after 2,000 years. We've watched a land wake up, bloom, and feed nations. And all of it unfolded exactly as written, not in a hidden corner of the ancient world, but in our lifetime, under the scrutiny of news cameras and historians. Yet the prophecy isn't finished. If the physical restoration of Israel took centuries to unfold, the spiritual restoration may come in a moment that shifts the world, challenges our assumptions, and forces every nation to rethink what it believes about history, destiny, and the God who speaks through time. But here's the truth most people miss. Ezekiel's vision isn't just about a nation coming back to life. It's about the possibility that nothing, no matter how broken, scattered, or forgotten, is beyond restoration. If God can bring a people back from the edges of extinction, if he can revive a land written off as barren, if he can fulfill promises older than any empire still standing, then what does that mean for the places in your life that feel like dry bones? Maybe your story isn't finished. Maybe restoration is closer than you think. What part of Ezekiel's prophecy resonates most with you? The return of the people, the revival of the land, or the spiritual awakening still to come? Let me know in the comments.